I should mention also that the title plays a role in every painting. This idea of seeking shelter was probably the best way to summarize the idea in as few words as possible. And creating the title before you paint is often a good idea to streamline your thoughts and help guide you through the process of selection and building up the image. This process of developing an image by starting with a tonal study has really given me a lot of confidence in developing the final painting. I feel I understand the values that are necessary to communicate the feeling of a day with a lot of weather, with wind, with flying snow, humidity in the air. Our subject grows fainter and fainter as it grows in the distance. It also gives me a chance to internalize the image somewhat. By that I mean just by painting it or sketching it again and again, I start to memorize this subject's details, the shapes, and the essence of what I want to capture. In this initial drawing, I'm trying to capture the sort of feeling that I, I've been working towards. And this starts with the placement of the figures. I'm lining the figures in a similar way to the way that I lined them up in the drill. I feel that this combination of the main figures coming forward from the background gives me the sort of composition that I like. And once I get the positions of these figures through some simple shapes, then I feel I can add the detail with a little more confidence and feel good about the overall piece from beginning to end. This is important because this serves as the foundation for the painting. So getting my shapes at a proper proportion, making sure that they create a sort of dynamic tension as well as balancing with the background elements, is something that I've thought a lot about and worked out in a number of smaller sketches and even a couple of smaller paintings. This is a pretty common practice for the professional artist or illustrator to actually, you have an idea in the beginning, but it's only kind of an idea, and to bring it out and to give it life is sometimes very quick and direct. Sometimes it's rather arduous, and a lot of research and study needs to be done to make it feel authentic. In this case, it's somewhere in the middle. I did conceive of the idea, but until I found some figures that I could use and played with the background a little bit, wasn't really convinced it was going to be a good piece. And doubt is never good, especially if you're trying to create something original. Eventually, I did find or create, the sort of design that I liked and I felt told the story in an authentic way and was still, within my ability to paint. I suppose it does help to have some experience with farm life. I know that I was remembering some of the visits to my relatives' farms as a youth, and the sort of definitely the silo is something that I remember strongly. The dairy barn that I visited, and riding horses. This was part of my youth, and so I do have some memory, some visual reference to draw upon, and also I guess there's a sort of storyline that I wanted to capture as well in all of this. That storyline being, the challenge of life when you're living in a rural area and a storm hits. You really got nothing or no one to rely on except yourself and maybe the occasional distant neighbor, but it can be harsh at times, and I'm sure there's a sort of urgency that happens when a storm like this hits. That's also an important component of this work. It certainly guided my thoughts towards the palette, the colors that I'm using, this idea of a winter storm. And it guided some thoughts that I'm using in the brushwork that you'll see later. And also helped me to kind of create a strategy as to how to show the figures. I wanted them to read basically flat, but I wanted certain highlights or left whites to create a feeling of form and a feeling of texture. So the character of a winter storm plays strongly in my choices in this painting. Well, the figures are starting to appear, aren't they? The lines, as I get more happy with the placement, the lines get stronger, a little more definitive. Those lines will actually guide my painting this time because of the complexity of the forms. Now I'm looking to start this, and I'm going to start with a light gray to just start to set the whites of the horses themselves. I want to capture the blaze so I can address the background without too much worry. And I'm trying to do this in of course, a sort of calligraphic manner, but I know I'm going to follow it with some darks later on. This is mostly to give myself a little bit of confidence. When adding those darks. Get the positions of the horses as best, well, we'll do our best to grab those off the bat and get the blaze as we want it. Just a rough idea of the legs. We're also going to paint our hand here. Very loosely. I want to preserve one light area through here, sort of like the thigh coming forward, so I got to be careful with that. Like that. Just preserving a few whites and getting the general shape of the body is my main concern here with the horses and this figure in front. And this will dry a little bit lighter. We can lighten it a bit too. So a crucial part of this is the blaze. How to make that read well. So if we preserve that white, that helps us a lot. These whites that we're preserving in here give us a lot of reference. Now I feel I can come to the background and start to place the background. And I'm going to preserve the white back there as well. I'm going to go with that same sort of neutral gray. Maybe a little bit of blue there. Very, very light. A lot of water. Preserve some of the whites. The banding on the silo, for example, could be a nice white. We'll bring it right down to the snow level here. Right down to our figures, which are pretty dry. And continue that across. I really want to isolate the white of the roof early on. I can get a little darker. Shape of the roof. Working quite dry, actually. I mean, we're going to paint some of that dry brush now. Thinking about that stormy quality. Yeah, I think that's about enough. Now I'm going to return. My figures are pretty dry. I'm going to start to build those up a little bit. I'm going to use a little bit of a sepia mixed with this neutral tint just to warm it up a little. Still primarily a gray. I think that'll be dark enough. Don't like that big hair. One of the difficult parts of this is the ears of the horse. But they need to be there because we read a lot into that. So I'm going to blend it with this horse. Getting those ears. And the big neck. I don't mind if they look like one body at this point. It's okay. And we're not painting precise legs. We're just kind of leaving it kind of blurry down there. Okay. Pretty good. Trying to keep it calligraphic as much as I can. Focus on that thigh. I'm going to drop a little bit of yellow ochre into this while it's wet. Get a little bit of a color variation. Little snap to the cloth. Top of the hat. All this is sort of focused on the
whites. The blaze is so useful for us. Let's put a little bit of color in the bridle while it's wet. Little red. See, I'm taking a little bit of that red here, adding it to the bridle. Just to lighten it a little bit. Okay. Right, continue. This looks quite dark because we're painting it against the white of the paper, but when we add some of those background hues, it's going to not seem quite as dark. Just some blurry legs there. Makes it feel a little more like they're in motion. They do have knobby knees. If you can establish that, that looks good too. All right, let's get the ears on this guy. A little darker. Just a little blurred. All right, let's move into the distant silo. We'll start back here in this far corner and gradually work towards our subject. I'm going to be adding a little bit of blue to that, a little bit of cobalt, just a small amount, more water. Course, and let's put down a touch here and see how it looks. It's not too bad. This is probably our most distant object. So putting it very pale back there. Another one. Classic silo shape. Let's put a little red in the barn. Just add some of that red to our gray. Everything is subtle modulation here. I'm leaving some whites in the barn back here just in case I want to indicate indicate, you know, texture. That looks good like that, actually. Here we bring it a little close to the horse. We'd create some distant trees back there. So let's have a little more of that bluer gray, very soft, means a lot of water, some tree shapes. All this is kind of focused on the whites that we're leaving. Okay, let's put in the silo. Here we go, a little darker. Not that dark. Blue, blue, cool, cool. And we add some water. Okay. I don't need a razor sharp edge, but some straightness is good. Okay, let's bring it close to our subject. Temporary, we lose those ears a little bit. It's okay. We'll get them back. As the painting dries, we'll restate. I'm going to try and straighten this. Maybe lighten it a little bit too. By lifting. Lift up a little edge here. Like that. Kind of blur it. Makes it feel a little more windswept. Taking my old brush here, starting to create a little, I don't know, fencing or texture on the ground. All very dry. Let's create a little bit of trees in the background. Okay, well, let's add some detail to our figure. Maybe we'll start in the figure. Some stronger darks. Let's see here. I'm going to add a little dark underneath using a warm gray. Little sepia with a little bit of red. Something like the face in the shadow here. And just a little color through here. A little darkness. Not too dark. I mean, we're about as dark as we want to go. I'm going to put that in shadow. I mean, just blur this a little bit, except for the leg coming out. Lower leg, a little dark, just the thigh. I'm going to bring in some fencing towards the back. Some lighter color. And we capture some snow on the rails, just by leaving a little band of white. Yeah, something like that. Let's go a little darker, maybe the underside of the horse. Small accents at this stage. We don't want to darken everything. Something that may give us a clue as to the anatomy is good. A little darker. The ears. Notice I keep coming back to the ears. These are just a little far away. Open up the barn door a little bit. Looking pretty good, pretty believable. The temptation is to really follow the photograph and paint everything like you see it, but we're trying to create an atmosphere here, and it doesn't really help us to do that because we're depending on, you know, some slight tonal variations. Slight modulations to create the atmosphere. Trying to make it feel like they're really wading in the snow. It's very deep. Put I should let it dry to see how all this looks. Before I add more detail. Softening some of this, blurring some of the edges. And give it a little more atmosphere. So now I want to take a little water and manipulate the whites a little bit. Just a little clean water. And come to this white, for example, and just blur it a little bit. To here a little bit. A little bit. Of course, we use a very old brush to do this. It's really hard on the brush. The painting is basically dry, and I return with that wet brush to blur some of the edges, like this edge, maybe a little hard. Let's come up here with a little water and blur it just a little bit. Blur that. Create atmosphere. Let's go right in front of him. Like wind is coming right in front of him. Let's try it again. Right? Okay, looking pretty good. Let's try just a little bit of splatter to the painting. This is a little tricky because the white of our paper is warm. And the white that I have is titanium white, and that tends to be a little cold. So I'm mixing it with some of that warm gray. Jaune Brilliant would be too yellow, so this is a little tricky part. I'm going to put a couple touches on here. See how they register. I'd like to match this if I could. Let's try to match that. A little more yellow. Make it a little wider. No, it's too cold, too gray. More white. Maybe I should try that Jaune Brilliant. Looks pretty good. I'm going to try a little bit. At an angle. All we need to really do it is through here. I want to avoid the front. Should it dry a little funny. And this pushes the image in even further. Need more in my brush.